Nadia was not the kind of woman who asked for much. She had grown up in a small house with thin walls and a mother who worked double shifts, and somewhere along the way, she had learned that the world did not hand you things. You had to go out and earn them with your own two hands. That lesson had followed her all the way through school, through college, through every job she had ever taken. It was the reason she was good at what she did, and it was the reason she survived what came next. She was 24 when she met Damien Wolf. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and changed the temperature of it. He ran a company his grandfather had started, a large and powerful business that touched real estate, private security, and several other industries across different countries. People in the financial world called him the Alpha King, not to his face, of course, but in the way people whisper nicknames that carry real meaning. He was sharp, controlled, and used to getting exactly what he wanted. Nadia was working as a junior financial analyst at one of his smaller companies when they first spoke. He had stopped by the office during a quarterly review, and she had pointed out an error in the report that 3 senior employees had missed. He looked at her differently after that. Not as an employee, as a person. They spent 2 years in a quiet, private relationship that existed mostly behind closed doors. He never introduced her to his inner circle. She never pushed him to. She told herself it was because they were still new, still finding their shape. The truth, the one she did not want to look at, was that she was always on the outside of a door he never fully opened. When she found out she was expecting a baby, she felt many things at once. There was fear, because her life was not yet where she wanted it to be. There was also something quiet and certain underneath the fear, a feeling that this was real, that this mattered, that she would handle it. She told Damien on a Tuesday evening in his apartment. She had not planned how to say it. She just said it plainly, the way she did most things. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he began to talk about a business deal, a partnership between his family's company and a powerful European family, a partnership that required him to be engaged to their daughter. He spoke carefully, using words like complicated, and timing, and expectations. He told her he valued her. He told her he would make sure she was taken care of. He told her that if she were willing to move to another city quietly, he would send money every month, and she would never have to worry. Nadia sat very still while he spoke. She was good at keeping her face calm, even when everything inside her was shifting like the ground after an earthquake. When he finished, she looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag and walked out of his apartment. The next morning, he transferred a large sum of money into her account. By noon, she had sent every cent of it back. She did not include a note. There was nothing she wanted to say to him in writing. There was actually nothing she wanted to say to him at all. She moved to a city 4 hours away, where she had no history and no connections. She rented a small apartment, set up a budget on a notepad, and started making calls. She had skills. She had a good reputation among the people she had worked with. She had no one to lean on, which meant she had no choice but to stand on her own. Her son was born on a cold morning in February. She named him Marcus and gave him her last name. He came into the world loud and curious, and from the first night she held him, she understood clearly what she was working for. The first 2 years were the hardest. She took every contract she could find, small audits, financial reviews for local businesses, anything that paid. She worked during Marcus's naps and after he fell asleep at night. She drank too much coffee and did not sleep enough, and sometimes sat alone in the kitchen after midnight, wondering if she had made the right choices. She always concluded that she had. By the time Marcus was 3, she had built a small but steady consultancy. She had a handful of loyal clients who trusted her eye for numbers and her ability to explain complex problems in simple language. By the time he was 5, she had hired her first employee. By the time he was 7, she had a proper office space, a team of 4, and a name in regional financial circles as someone you called when the numbers didn't add up, and you needed someone honest enough to tell you why. She did not think about Damien Wolf often. When she did, it was not with anger, not anymore. Anger takes energy, and she had learned to spend her energy only on things worth spending it on. What she felt, when she thought of him at all, was a quiet kind of clarity. He had shown her exactly who he was. She had believed she could change that, for a while. Then she had accepted that she could not, and she had moved on. That was all. What she did not know, because she had deliberately stopped following anything connected to his world, was that his world was quietly coming apart. The business partnership he had chosen over her had not gone well. The family he had merged with brought their own problems, and over the years, those problems had become his problems. Executives left his company. Questions arose about how certain money had been moved inside some of his overseas projects. The press began writing about him in a different tone than before, more curious, less admiring. His reputation, which had always felt solid as stone, was developing cracks. Damien was the kind of man who had always believed he could manage anything if he stayed calm and stayed in control. He was discovering that there are situations control cannot fix. When Marcus was 7 years old, a regional government office put out a contract for an audit of a large development project. The project had several private investors, and the largest was Wolf Industries. Nadia's firm was recommended by a colleague, and she won the contract. She found out who the investor was 3 days after signing. She sat with that information for a weekend. Then she told herself very clearly that this was a professional contract, that she had earned it on merit, and that walking away from it, to protect a man who had not protected her, would be a decision she would regret. She stayed on the project. The first joint meeting between the audit team and the project stakeholders was held in a conference room on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown. Nadia arrived early, arranged her papers, poured herself a glass of water, and waited. When Damien walked in and saw her sitting across the table, he stopped for just a fraction of a second. It was the kind of pause that most people would not notice. Nadia noticed. She gave him one professional nod and looked back at her papers. She was there to do a job. She did it. The audit took 3 months. Nadia was thorough by nature and by training, and thorough work leaves no room for overlooking things. Buried inside the financial records of the project, she found evidence that certain funds had been moved in ways that misrepresented the financial health of the project to the government partners. It was not an accident. The pattern was too consistent for that. She documented everything carefully, reviewed it with her legal advisor, and submitted her full findings to the audit client. She was also required by professional standards to report the findings to the relevant regulatory authority. She did both things calmly and without drama. That was her job. She did her job. The findings opened a formal investigation. Within a few months, 2 of Damien's senior leaders were facing legal charges. The board of Wolf Industries, which had been restless and repositioning for some time, voted to remove him as chief executive while the investigation continued. His wife filed for separation within the same week. The press covered all of it. The name Wolf, which had appeared in business sections with a certain kind of respect for decades, now appeared with questions attached. He was not finished. Men like Damien rarely disappear completely, but the version of him that had seemed untouchable was gone. The power he had built his whole identity around had slipped from his hands in full public view. He found Nadia in a parking structure one evening, standing by her car. She knew immediately that he had waited there for her. She stopped walking and looked at him without expression. He looked older. His jacket was good, and his posture was still straight, but something behind his eyes was different. Something that had been hard and certain for as long as she had known him had softened into something quieter. He said he needed to explain himself. She told him that if he had anything to say regarding the audit findings, he should speak to her firm's legal representative. He said that was not why he was there. She waited. He told her that he had thought about her, not sometimes, but more than he had allowed himself to admit. He told her there were things he had handled badly. He said the word Marcus carefully, like a man saying a word in a language he had not yet earned the right to speak. He said he had looked away from that name for years, because looking at it meant looking honestly at what he had chosen, and he had not been ready for that. Nadia listened to all of it. When he finished, she did not fill the silence right away. Then she told him that she had built a life, that Marcus had everything he needed and was growing into exactly the kind of person she had hoped to raise, that she had not spent the last 7 years waiting for this conversation or for anything from him. She told him she did not carry bitterness toward him, and she meant it, which was the thing that probably surprised him most. But she also told him clearly that she owed him nothing, and that this conversation was not something she needed. She got into her car and drove to pick up her son from school. A few months later, Damien contacted her through a family law attorney. He asked about the possibility of acknowledging Marcus and having some form of presence in his son's life. Nadia spoke with her own attorney. She thought about it for a long time, not in relation to Damien, but in relation to Marcus. What would serve him? What would hurt him? What a good mother would honestly do. She agreed to a carefully structured first meeting. She set clear conditions. She did not make it easy, but she did not make it impossible either. Not for Damien's sake, for her son's. Because she had decided long ago that Marcus would not grow up carrying the weight of his parents' history, and she was not going to use him as a way to continue a fight she had already won. Whether that relationship between father and son grew into something real, only time would show. What was already certain was this: Nadia Osei had walked away from a man who had everything, and had chosen not to include her. She had built something quietly, patiently, and honestly, with no one watching and no one helping. And when the world finally paid attention, it was not because she had done something dramatic. It was because she had simply done her job with integrity, at a moment when the man who had sent her away had forgotten how to do the same. She was 32 years old. Her firm had 7 employees. Her son had a gap in his front teeth, and a habit of asking questions that made her think harder than she expected. She had not set out to bring anyone down. She had set out to build something of her own. She had done exactly that, and in the end, that was the most powerful thing of all.